Sir John Major is perhaps the most unlikely of our modern British Prime Ministers. He grew up in poverty and left school with 3 O-levels. Yet that didn't stop him rising through the Tory ranks at phenomenal speed, serving as Foreign Secretary, then Chancellor for Margaret Thatcher, before replacing the Iron Lady as Prime Minister.
The new Prime Minister, John Major, moves into 10 Downing Street. He picks a cabinet whose apparent emphasis is on party unity.
But battles over Europe, sleaze, and party divisions threatened his leadership.
In short, it is time to put up or shut up.
And by the time he was unseated in 1997, it was to Tony Blair and a Labour landslide. In a very rare interview, the man once held to epitomise our meritocratic ideals is passionate about what his party, his country and his generation need to do to fix Britain's problems, to restore its pride and thrive in the 21st century. Sir John Major, very good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for agreeing to speak to me. I can't help but note that you don't often do TV interviews these days. So I must start by asking why you've agreed to do this one.
Well, it's a rather unusual question, but I'll give you a strictly truthful answer. There were 2 reasons, really. One, because it was a lengthy interview. And I do think a large number of the short interviews I see merely produce soundbite answers. They don't really inform the public. And secondly, though I probably shouldn't say this, it's 65 years since I joined the Conservative Party. I was, am, and always will be a Conservative. But in recent months, little longer than a few months, there's not been a great deal I could say that I would wish to say in favour of what the previous government were doing. That being so, I thought it better just to stay off the air. Now, of course, the election's behind us. The party's looking again to the future, and I can return to speaking out, hopefully in favour.
Well, there's a lot to get into. Let's start with where we are as a country, the country that you led for 7 years. You used to say vocally, publicly, that you dreamt of a nation at ease with itself. Has your dream come true?
Well, emphatically not. Indeed, quite the reverse at the moment. Wherever you look, not just in our country, let me add, but right across Europe and the United States, there's a great deal of dissatisfaction. And a large part of it has come about from one single effect, and that is the financial crisis of 2007 to 8, which has cast a very long shadow. And of course, there were other things that were not the result of any individual national government. The COVID pandemic, for example, was something that was unexpected. The Ukraine war, with all the difficulties created for governments right the way across Europe because of the increase in fuel prices. And the net result of all of those, I think, is a great deal of dissatisfaction and a great deal of pressure on democracy, with the belief that it has been failing the electorates.
Well,
and you've seen that in the volatility of the electorate in the last 2 general elections.
Well, a lot of voters do think democracy is failing them, particularly young people, for reasons that we'll get onto. But just before we do that, and going back to where we are as a country today, Labour are back in power after 14 years. Given your answer to my first question about your party, would you say, did your party, the Conservatives, deserve to lose?
I think there's a time when democracy needs a change of government. I could see that in 1997. We had been in government for 18 years, and it was perfectly true to say that we were tired and that we were running out of fresh ideas, and we were running out of fresh people to make ministers and re-inject the government with vigour. And of course, the same thing applies, although it was only 14 years on this occasion, but 14 years plus the difficulties that I've just been talking about.
We're talking shortly after some data published showed there's been a really significant fall in this country in national pride. Very significantly fewer people are proud to be British and are proud of this country's history. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think because they're not seeing us succeed. I think there are a range of reasons. That's partly because of their own personal experience. It's partly because many of the things that they took for granted appear to need reform, appear to be broken.
But you still think liberal democracy and capitalism can deliver for young people who've currently felt for a long time that their future's been stolen from them?
The essential thing is that the economies begin to grow. absolutely the essential thing is that the economies begin to grow, which is why one or two of the things the new government are doing, I think, are wrong.
Such as?
Well, I think going for capital gains tax, if you want the economy to grow, don't start penalising the people who provide the money for it to grow.
The government says they need the money. We're skint, need to raise money, £22 billion fiscal hole.
I've heard that dreary tale forever. I spent time as a PPS in the Treasury. I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury, responsible for public expenditures. I was Chancellor, and I was First Lord of the Treasury. I've heard that dreary tale again and again and again. And I think there's a degree of hyperbole about what is happening at the moment, and the Labour Party have got themselves hooked on one or two silly policies before they're really ready to pursue something more sensible.
It was during the 1980s that Major rose through the Tory ranks and Thatcher's Britain. A decade that brought great change and great discord. Throughout the 1980s, you often saw riots on the streets. And one of the first things that we've seen in this country after the election of Sir Keir Starmer's government has been major rioting. Why do you think we've just seen riots on the street of this country?
It's a function of the general dissatisfaction. If people are broadly happy with the direction their life is taking, then they don't riot. If they aren't happy, then they are much more likely to be subjected to things like rioting, when seductive voices suggest we ought not to do this, we ought not to do that, and encourage people to take action against it.
One of the choices that the Keir Starmer government has made concerns the early release of prisoners, and prisons was a big part of your thinking, obviously, when you were in power. Prison reform is a subject on which you have been outspoken in the past.
Well, let me go back in history a bit for this. I was a humble parliamentary private secretary in the Home Office in the early 1980s. When Willie Whitelaw was Home Secretary. And I will never forget the day he burst into our morning meeting, having just been told that the prison population had reached 40,000. Terrible, he said. How can it possibly be 40,000? It's now more than twice that.
How would you have approached the dilemma of, on the one hand, wanting to be tough on rioters, but on the other, the fact being that prisons are full and therefore you need to release people?
Now, I'm not some soft liberal saying we should understand everything that's gone wrong and treat people excessively leniently. Where necessary, there should be hard sentences to protect the public. People who are violent, people who are habitual criminals, I thoroughly agree they should be in prison. But I think I would argue that there are many people, they ought to be treated by non-custodial sentencing of one sort or another. Where people are marginal, you send them into prison. With the crowding we've got, they're probably in their cells for most of their day. There's very little recreation. In very few prisons is there actually any attempt at rehabilitation.
For 30 years, the direction of policy has been against what you say. So why has prison reform of the kind you're advocating now, and in fairness have advocated for a long time, why has that prison reform not happened?
Well, I suppose most people think it's not what the electorate wish to hear. It is in a civilised society what I think the electorate has a right to hear. We haven't got a really hawkish nation who's out to punish people vilely. Of course not. If we had, why would so many people from abroad wish to come to this country? I don't see them queuing to get up into China or queuing to get into Russia or Iran or North Korea. I do see people with hope in their hearts trying to come here because they see us as a place of hope.
It was hope that lifted Major up and out of poverty. Growing up in South London, just a stone's throw from the Oval. He's as famous for his love of cricket as his politics. His loyalty to one of the world's most famous cricketing venues, earning him a room named in his honour.
The Oval is a spiritual home as far as I'm concerned. I've been coming here now for 70 years, or very nearly 70 years. Whenever I've come here, I concentrate wholly on the cricket. When I first came here as a boy, I sat over there on wooden benches with a bottle of Tizer and sandwiches and a scorebook, and I would score. And I don't think in my life I've ever been any really more totally content and happy than I was actually doing that. So I've always had a huge affection both for cricket and for here.
Your team would send you, wouldn't they? A little birdie tells me they'd send you here. They think, Sir John's looking rather worried about things. Let's send him off to the Oval and he'll come back with a decision.
Well, well that's perfectly true. They did. and I did, but I wasn't aware of what lay behind it, so thank you for telling me that.
John, not a bad sight, is it?
I mean, it's absolutely beautiful.
When did you first come here?
I first came to the Oval, I can't be precise as to the date, but early 50s, 52 or 53. I would have been 10. We lived in Brixton. I could walk here in 25 minutes.
You had a remarkable childhood, certainly for someone who would go on to be Prime Minister. And it starts with the fact that your father was a mid-Victorian, born in 1879. What was he like, your father? Tom.
Oh, well, he was remarkable. He truly was remarkable. He's the best one-on-one storyteller I ever came across.
So he was this impresario and performer, but there was a particular, I think, commercial deal that went badly wrong, and it led to a very dramatic change in your circumstances.
Yes, my father did a deal just on the basis of shaking hands, and it fell apart, and the lady he'd done the deal with then changed what she required. My father was in no condition to go to court and dispute it. And so we lost pretty much everything we had. We lost the house. We lost most of our possessions. We moved to 2 rooms in Brixton. So it was a fairly remarkable change in life.
But you resist the invitation and the temptation to cast your childhood as a sort of school of hard knocks. You're humble about your humble origins. And I do think it's a very unusual beginning for a Prime Minister. And I do think that it's quite remarkable that you should have entered number 10 from where you began. Just describe, if you would, the circumstances of Cold Harbour Lane, because it was really just 2 rooms and a lavatory, wasn't it, if that?
Well, there was no lavatory, actually. It was 3 floors down. I should say my experience wasn't unique. In the post-war periods and in the early 50s, there were many families who lived in exactly the circumstances we did, or a good deal worse. There's no point crying about that. I was extremely lucky in the family that I had, even if they had been unlucky in what life had done for them. But there were just 2 rooms, so there were 5 of us. So my brother moved out and actually lived in a shed for a long time while they were repaying debt. And there wasn't much money. I can't ever recall my mother buying herself anything new. Never a new dress.
No luxuries.
No luxuries, never a hairdo, never a meal out, never the cinema, never a holiday, certainly nothing remotely as smart as a bottle of wine in the house. So that was the experience of millions of people at that time, so I'm not saying it was unique. It was a time of absolutely mass immigration into the UK, particularly from the West Indies and particularly into Brixton. So it was a time of quite a lot of social turmoil there. I saw the immigrants who'd come, and many of them became my childhood playmates at cricket and football in Eastlake Road.
I'm very keen to talk to you about those immigrants and how it shaped your politics.
I dislike intensely the way society has come to regard immigration as an ill in the way it has. I don't agree with that. I've never agreed with it. When I was a boy and was playing with the children of the West Indian migrants in the 1950s, I'll tell you what I saw, and I'll tell you what I didn't see. I didn't see people who had come here for social benefits. I did see people who had come here to bring their families here for a better way of life for their families. And I think that is a noble thing to do. That's what you would do for your family. It's what most of the people watching this program would wish to do for their own family.
Just to stay with your point, and the point you make about migration, the language that concerns you about migration has primarily emanated from your own party, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. Yes, it has, and I don't like it. And I don't think it represents the view of the people I have known all my life as Conservatives. The Conservative Party in the country has shrunk in terms of membership, and at the last election, for special circumstances, has shrunk in terms of the vote. But there's a vast number of people, the people who attend the Rotary Club, run the Rotary Club, run the Women's Institute, are involved in all sorts of charity work. They are the heart and backbone of the Conservative Party. I'm not saying that they aren't in other parties too. Of course they are. We have no monopoly of virtue. But there are a vast number of those thoroughly decent, caring people who are Conservatives. And I don't think that that has been truly reflected in policy over recent years. And it needs to be if we're to regain our position as one of the two great parties of this country.
You once wrote, instead of inciting fear, the bigots should have gone to the Oval, where, when the West Indies played, it was carnival time. The atmosphere was full of fun, and this idea that the bigots should have gone to the Oval prompts me to ask you whether or not you worry that bigotry has seeped into the Conservative Party.
Well, you say the Conservative Party. I don't know why you single out the Conservative Party. It isn't, there's a degree of bigotry in the country that always has been.
But is there in your party?
I think it probably is in a number of parties. I don't think it's solely within the Conservative Party. It's certainly, some of it is in the Conservative Party, some of it is in Reform UK. I've no doubt some of it is in the Labour Party. Don't forget, when you look at politics, people tend to think that fascism and communism are at opposite ends of the political pole. They're not. They meet. They're next to one another. So it's not fair to say it is just the Conservative Party.
How do you
There
think...
are people in the Conservative Party who advocate policies I would disagree with. I wouldn't call them bigots. They're entitled to their view, and I'm entitled to my view. We should be proud that people from all around the world look on us as a bastion of freedom and wish to come here.
Why has immigration got to the levels it has? Over 700,000 net, do you think?
Well, there's been a big change, of course, since Brexit. Lots of people from Europe who work particularly, actually, as it happens in the hospitality industry, have left. And other people have been actually encouraged by the government to come here. And then there are the people who come here by votes who haven't been encouraged to come here at all, but do because they're not quite sure where to go.
You mentioned the boats. Are you glad to see the back of the Rwanda scheme?
Absolutely.
Why?
Well, if you really wish to know, I thought it was unconservative, un-British, if one dare say it in a secular society, un-Christian and unconscionable. And I thought that really this is not the way to treat people. We used to transport people nearly 300 years ago from our country. Felons who at least had had a trial and been found guilty of something, albeit that the trial might have been cursory. I don't think transportation, for that is what it is a policy suitable for the 21st century.
Well, let me challenge you on that, because a lot of people, some in your party, some outside of your party, some that were once in your party would say, what's really unconservative or unchristian is allowing this boat crossing to continue. And the way you stop it, and this was the argument of the former British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, the way you stop it is by having an effective deterrent. So isn't it actually the compassionate view to take all measures necessary to stop the boats, as someone once said, and isn't the threat of deportation to Rwanda part of that policy?
Are they seriously saying to me that somewhere in the backwoods of some North African country, they actually know what the British Parliament has legislated for? I think not. I absolutely think that is not the case. So I'm not sure that it is the deterrent at this stage. If it had actually happened, it might have been, but it would still have been odious, in my view.
And it's a hard problem to solve, let's be honest about
it's
this.
a very hard problem to solve.
Very big trade-offs involved.
No, it's a very hard problem to solve.
You're working with tough gangs.
Which is why, over the last year, I kept my mouth shut about what I thought about it. But let us put it in a proper long-term context. There are people coming from all around the world who are coming here. And the more autocracies grow in other parts of the world, the more people have a life without the freedoms that we enjoy, the more they will seek to come here. A lot of people from Africa over the next 50 years will look for something better for themselves and their families. This isn't just a short-term problem. So how do we solve that problem? I think if the European and other countries worked together and decided they would tackle this problem at its roots, let us seek out where these rubber boats actually are manufactured.
Often China.
Often China. Let us ban their import into the whole of Europe and seek out the gangs working with the local countries, not just Britain, but working with our partners all across Europe. Collectively, we can provide a bigger deterrent.
What kind of health is the Conservative Party in today?
I may be deceiving myself, though I don't think so. But I think a large part of our nation is by instinct centre-right. Not far-right, but centre-right. And the only party that can legitimately appeal to the centre-right is the Conservative Party. And that is what we have to do. We have to decide where our natural support really lies and appeal to them. People may have made a misjudgment about the last election. We lost 5 seats to Reform UK, and people are jumping up and down, and some rather reckless people are saying, well, we must merge with them. Well, that would be fatal. We lost 50 to the Liberals, and we lost a huge amount to Labour. We lost the vote on the left more than on the right. And we have to focus on that centre-right position. We're not an ideological party. I do think traditionally we have been a common sense party. And I'm optimistic. I think we have had such a bad defeat. We have got a base upon which we can build in a wholly new and, I think, potentially effective way.
Have you made up your mind about who you'll support to be the next leader?
I'd like to support someone who's going to look at the long-term problems and make a suggestion as to which direction we should go and bring people back into the party who are genuinely centre-right. So I'm more concerned with what they say than the individual personality. As to have I made up my mind, no, I haven't.
I heard a story about how after you were voted out of office in 1997, you said to a young George Osborne, the great danger for your party was to be taken over by its right wing. What's the great danger today?
Well, I don't think the Conservative Party should be taken over by any part of it. There are different strands of conservatism. We need the right wing. What we don't need is the far right, people who've attracted themselves to the right wing who perhaps would be more comfortable in Reform UK than with us. What I want is for them to reach a concordat so that they can agree and so that we don't have these factional disputes within the party.
But why do you say it would be fatal to merge with Reform UK? A lot of people think Nigel Farage should be in the Tory party.
Well, I don't share that view.
Why?
Because I don't think he's a Conservative. And he spent most of his time in the last few years telling people how much he dislikes the Conservative Party and would like to destroy it. I don't think that's a terribly good background for bringing someone into the party.
And yet all around the world, lots of Conservative parties, like Trump's Republicans, like perhaps the Conservative Party in this country, have been attacking institutions. They've been attacking democracy. Why has that happened, do you think? Why have Conservatives been drawn to those anti-democratic tendencies?
I find it baffling that they've done that. I mean, the previous government were talking of the blob. The blob are people who work for the government and who are the mechanism to transfer the government's policies to reality. Doesn't seem to be very sensible to insult them. And a whole series of other people. Judges were enemies of the people, I seem to recall many people said. And half the nation who voted to sustain our position in Europe, a position the Tory party had had for 40 years, were insulted as Ramonas. I find it very difficult to understand why people actually took that particular view. And I think insulting people whose votes you need and whose votes you're going to ask for does not seem to me a very good form of canvassing. But that is what people did, and we saw the result at the general election.
When Major came to power in 1990, the issue of the UK's relationship with Europe was causing serious ructions within the party. Decades later, the matter hasn't gone away, and divide remains. What has Brexit done to and for your party?
Well, Brexit has been the most divisive thing that has happened in our party in my lifetime. And it is less important what it has done to our party than what it has done to our country.
That was going to be my next question. What do you think it has done?
Well, I don't think it's done anything good. If I may just reflect on it for a moment, it's made our country weaker, poorer, and that is emphatically not in the interests of our country. The world saw us as a member of the European Union. It was a megaphone to magnify our power in the world. So instead, we are isolated and outside.
Did it have to be thus? I mean, could Brexit not have, if delivered in a different way, could it not have fulfilled the promise of those who advocated it, which is that it would make us richer and more free?
Well, it's done exactly the reverse, hasn't it? What has happened to all the benefits of Brexit that we heard about?
Well, maybe they're yet to come.
Well, I don't recall people saying during the election campaign, in 10 or 15 years' time, maybe 20, we'll have some benefits of Brexit.
But do you not grant that there could be?
No, stop a minute. It was going to be milk and honey straight away. And it wasn't milk and honey. And Brexit was sold to the nation on the basis of things that haven't happened and couldn't have happened. There was a great degree of misapplication of reality, if I can put it in that delicate way.
Do you mean lies?
That's another way of putting it, that were actually told to the people about what Brexit was going to be about. And a large amount of that came from Conservative sources, not all of it. There were some very senior Labour sources, part of that, at exactly the same time. But I don't see the great advantages that were going to come from Brexit having come yet. And I don't see any likelihood that they're suddenly going to magically appear in the future. Why do people not look at the practical example, the practical effect that we are poorer? And that is not some statistic. Being poorer means taxes are higher, expenditure on public services are lower. That's actually what it means. And that is what has actually happened because of the false promises of Brexit. People said we were going to get our sovereignty back. Well, up to a point, that's true. We now have sovereignty to be poorer. We have sovereignty to be less influential. Well, so if you ask, am I resolved? The Brexiteers now say, oh, well, get over it. It's all gone. If my house had been burgled, I would be pretty fed up if the burglar then said, well, it's all over now, forget about it.
So would you advocate going back into either the single market or the customs union?
I don't think it's practical at the present moment. I don't think it is politically practical at the present moment, but I think it will happen. The next generation, the young generation, when they voted overwhelmingly to stay in the European Union. In 10 years' time, when they and their compadres are in Parliament and running the country, it may be possible to get back. But the Brexiteers did a good job in making it difficult because we not only insulted our neighbours, but in addition to that, we have lost all the special advantages we had, the rebates, the opt-out from the social chapter, and the opt-out from the single currency. All those things are gone. If we were sought to get back, we would probably have to accept them or we couldn't get back. So it may be that that is going to be more than Parliament at any stage I can see will accept in the foreseeable future. What they'll do in the long-term future, who can tell, because who knows how circumstances will change. But the Brexiteers did a very good job in dividing us from Europe, even though they did a very bad job in proving our prosperity and our wealth when they did so.
Let's turn to the New World Order. How would you describe Britain's standing in the world today compared with, say, 20 years ago?
Well, it's obviously a little less than it was. And that's not because we have particularly failed. It's because it's the way the world has changed. America looks as though it may not be the America that would pay any price, bear any burden to protect the success of human rights. China has been marching into the world in a phenomenal way.
Do you think we're getting China right? Do you think our approach to China is a healthy one? Do you think we're ready for a world in which China is as dominant as it is today?
I think a lot of work has been done, particularly to protect us against things like cybercrime and to protect us against China appropriating technology that is legitimately British. But what, if you want a safe world in the future, must be the primary aim of diplomacy. The primary aim of diplomacy would be to make sure that China and America may be opponents, but they don't become enemies and they don't go to war. That must be the primary aim of diplomacy. And I think we have a role to play in that. And I think we should endeavour to play it. One of the things I think we would be wise to build up in the next few years, we're no longer the great military power that we were, and we can't afford to be. But we're not insignificant. But in terms of soft power, I think we can build up our soft power. I think we can build up our diplomacy. Which is best in terms of leadership, winning a war or stopping a war in the first place? Good question, isn't it? And I think if you can stop a war in the first place, that's fantastic. And we can play a part in all that. But we're going to have to watch what is happening in democracy and autocracy because the balance is changing and changing more quickly than most people realize. And the main point about the autocratic nations, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and many others. There must be about 40 nations in the world, something approximately, who are autocratic or neo-autocratic. That's 1/5, over 1/5 of the nations around the whole world. And as they grow, democracy has been shrinking. People don't, I think, focus on it. But democracy has shrunk in every one of the last 18 years. We thought, after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall, that democracy had won the battle of ideas. But we hadn't. And autocracy has come roaring back in the last 15, 16, 17, 18 years. And we have to be aware of that danger and aware of the dangers that could arise from it, which are many and varied.
Is autocracy always and everywhere wrong?
Well, always and everywhere, it's difficult to tell. I wouldn't like it anywhere because it restrains human liberty and human freedom. And I think one thing our country has stood for is liberty and freedom of action, freedom of thought, freedom of religion. You don't get that in autocracies. Let me give you a practical illustration. Let us suppose that the American president ceases to be active alongside Ukraine. Let us suppose Germany ceases to be active alongside Ukraine and the Europeans pull back, and Ukraine loses and Russia wins. Is that the end of the matter? No, it isn't, because for every event there is a consequence. And the Ukrainians are spilling their blood on our behalf. But let's assume Russia wins. How does the world see that? They will see that the West has funked and failed to protect a democracy, a big democracy, in Europe, of all places, from an autocracy. Now, what does that mean for the perception of America? They haven't prevailed. China will notice that. Will it encourage China to think, aha, we may be being too timid about whether we go into Taiwan? Maybe America will do nothing about that either. And of course, what happens to the allies of the West? What happens in Asia to Japan, to South Korea, to the Philippines? Strong allies of the West. And they will see the West has funked it. What do? Do they decide we're safer to line up behind China rather than the West, because that would be safer? Or do they say, then we had better be prepared to protect ourselves better and start moving towards nuclear capability? And so you get suddenly a much more dangerous world. And that's why I think the West needs to continue its support of Ukraine so that they have the capacity to defeat them.
But do you think the West has the will to do that, based on what you see right now looking around the world?
I'm alarmed at the possibility that America might decide that Ukraine is not a strategic interest, because she certainly is to the position of the United States in the world. And I think we should argue for the fact that we as a nation should argue for the fact that she is, and we should try and lead people into believing that it is right for us to defend Ukraine, because you are defending freedom against autocracy. And if you begin to weaken and lose on a mega scale, for this would be a massive setback, unlike anything we've seen before, then there will be a price to pay for that. And it may be a price we don't wish to pay.
You're talking really about a new world order in which democracy is, to some extent, receding and autocracy is rising.
Well, that is what's happening.
Yeah, sure. But what's really striking is where that democratic recession, as some people have called it, comes from. Because around the world today, many young people are losing faith in democracy. If you look at the support for the AfD in Germany, if you look at the support for Marine Le Pen in France, if you look at the support for Javier Milei in Argentina, a lot of these people are getting their support from those under 30. When you look at what's happening, as you say, to real wages the last 20 years, can you really blame those young people?
No, I don't. But you can't expect these young people to have a strategic view of what happens if we were to lose the war, for example. I don't suppose they've even thought of it. And so I don't believe we've got a nation of youngsters who are less determined to be free than earlier generations. But I don't think politics anywhere is widening the debate beyond the rather trivial narrow lines of party disputes in country after country and some disputes that hit the headlines.
Isn't one of the other reasons why faith in democracy, perhaps in this country, has suffered? Because, frankly, standards in public life, ethics in public life, have, a lot of people would argue, been in the gutter. What was going through your mind when you saw the revelations about, for instance, Partygate, as it's now known?
Well,
I mean, that damages trust in democracy, I can tell you.
It did, yes. And I think it really offended people's moral view. I think there's a lot we can do to provide a much more serious examination of potential poor behaviour and actual poor behaviour.
I don't think anyone would ever accuse you of being chairman of the Boris Johnson fan club, but do you think he damaged standards in public life?
I'm not going to get into individuals. I mean, I don't really want to spend my time looking back at what has happened. It has happened. We need to be, I want politicians looking at the 2020s, the 2030s, the 2040s.
And I know you began.
I want people to actually look at what the position is going to be in the future. When did you last hear from any party a senior politician make a lengthy, detailed speech on what we needed to do to protect our place in the world and our values and our wealth 25 years from now?
Are you concerned about the calibre of people going into politics today? Do you think it's changed in a bad way?
Well, I've not been in the House of Commons, so it's difficult to say. But I think the range of people going in there has changed on both sides. The Conservative Party have less people from the armed forces who used to have a good knowledge of it, and less people from business. And I think that is a loss for them. And you'll be surprised to hear me say this, but with the Labour Party, I think when they moved away from the traditional working class Labour member who lived in his community, suffered the same hardships as his community and knew it from back to front, and he was replaced by students with degrees and left-wing instincts, I think that was a loss to the Labour Party and to the nature of the House of Commons.
I am going to ask you some nostalgic questions now. Indulge me. We've talked about the future, and I want to talk about this. Ken Clarke said of you on Radio 4 recently, he said he was very, very fond of you, great friends, but it was always a cause of regret to him. The thing about John is Sir John, is that he just never seemed to enjoy being Prime Minister. And Ken Clarke said this was because you were very, very concerned, perhaps for understandable reasons, in particular with what the press said. And I want to ask you about those two things. Did you ever enjoy being Prime Minister, and were you too concerned about the press?
Well, on the latter part, the answer is probably yes. I mean, Ken knows me very well. I was always being told that, not so much by Ken, though certainly by Ken, but also by Douglas Hurd. So, all right, I accept that criticism, probably true. All I can say is, today, people need be less concerned because the press is less powerful than it was. But they, of course, now have to deal with social media, which is an infinitely worse problem for them. Did I ever enjoy being Prime Minister? Yes, I did. I enjoyed bits of it. I didn't enjoy all of it. I didn't enjoy the unpleasant things you have to do. I didn't enjoy the unpleasant things that came up and hit you, and I don't think any Prime Minister does. So I don't think I was unique in that. But newspapers, probably they're right. So
this is looking at the past, but I do it with a view to the future. I imagine the National Lottery is one of those policies that you're proudest of in your time in power. And the thing that's striking about it is that the benefits were really felt a long time after you were out of power. And I wonder whether or not you think that that's an important example of how one of the problems with democracy is that you've got to let other people take your successes.
Well, let me tell you how the lottery came about. I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury in the 80s. That is the cabinet minister who is responsible for negotiating public expenditure for each department. And I noticed that the two things that the British public most enjoy, which is the arts, culture as one subject, and sport as another, got petty cash from the government. Absolute petty cash. They couldn't compete with health or social security or defence, and so they're always going to get petty cash. And that's what caused the lottery to be set up, because it was money that the government didn't have. It was outside the government, and it went to the arts bodies or the sports bodies. And do you know how much the lottery has now spent on good causes?
Tens of billions?
It's coming up to £48 billion. 48 billion. And there's hardly a part of the country that hasn't benefited from it in some way. And providing it is efficiently run by the people in charge of it and left alone by successive governments, that's important. Government should keep their noses out of it. It's a national lottery. It's not a government piggy bank. Providing that, there's no reason why it shouldn't continue. And the difference it's made in sport and the arts, I think, is significant. And so, yes, I'm very pleased to have done it. And it doesn't bother me in the slightest that I'm way out of the way by the time the benefits become clear.
What's your biggest regret with your time of power?
Wasn't long enough.
Among his achievements in power, Major laid the groundwork for the Good Friday Agreement and is widely regarded to have left a healthy economy to his successors. But it wasn't a political moment that made the greatest impression, rather a moment in history that Major believes reflected the best of the British spirit.
Standard bearers! Carry! Standards!
On the 50th anniversary of D-Day in 1994, Major looked on as over 10,000 veterans paid tribute to their fallen comrades.
We were in France with people from countries who had all fought in the coalition, and we were at Arromanches. And we were watching from on high the veterans marching on the sands. And we thought they'd march for about an hour. And they were wearing smart blazers and trousers with rows of medals and berets. And they came, and they came, and they came. And it went on and on and on. There were tens of thousands of them, infinitely more than anyone could possibly have imagined. And they marched even as the tide came in and began to come over their boots. They just came on marching. And it was the most remarkable sight. And you really had a glimpse of what our country is really about. I think if I had one moment to relive, that would be it.
What's your advice to someone wanting to go into politics today?
Oh, do. I mean, if people believe they can make a contribution to politics, I think they should. And I'd certainly like more young people to do it, because we need young people to become engaged. If they get disengaged from democracy, we are in deep trouble.
What's your guilty pleasure?
Lemon drops. Lemon drop martinis, preferably in the plural.
I don't think I know what a lemon drop martini is.
Then your life needs to be enhanced.
What's the drop in a lemon drop martini?
Oh, don't ask me what it's made
What's
of.
in it? You just know that you like it.
I was introduced to it in a restaurant called 33 in Washington by Brent Scowcroft, who used to be George H.W. Bush's national security advisor, and I fell in love with it straight away.
Last couple. How would you like to be remembered?
Fondly.
What do you fear most?
Autocracy and dictatorship, which is what it merges into.
What would you still like to achieve?
I think I'd like to live long enough to see my country at ease with itself.
Sir John Major, thank you very, very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Then this heart has to fight again, so I've had to suffer. Hello. grown. Breaking up is a painful thing. Do you know when night falls? I feel so. meet again, so both had to suffer. Hello, now I know what to do when
ơi hả ba lô